If you are able, please rise, either in body or spirit, and join with me in the call to worship, which is printed in your bulletin. O come, let us worship and bow down.
Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker.
For our God is filled with mercy for God's beloved.
Lord, have mercy on us. Let our worship begin.
Please remain standing as together we sing our opening hymn, He Touched Me, which is number 505 in your hymnal. Let us now join our voices in the prayer of confession found in the bulletin. Shall we pray? O God,
we have become distant from you and from our neighbor. Lord, have mercy. We often fail to speak out for justice. Christ, have mercy. Forgive us as we fall short of your glory. God, have mercy. Amen.
Friends, hear and proclaim the good news.
In Jesus Christ we are forgiven. Thanks be to God.
Please join with me now in praying the prayer of illumination printed in your bulletin. Shall we pray? God,
have mercy. Speak your eternal word to us, that we may respond with faithfulness, service, and love. Amen.
You may be seated. Our first reading today comes from Psalms chapter 34, verses 1 through 3. This reading can be found on page 481 of your Pew Bible. Listen now to the reading of Holy Scripture. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. Our gospel reading this morning is from the 10th chapter of Mark, verses 46 through 52, found on page 879 of your Pew Bible. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, rise, he is calling you." And throwing off his mantle, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Master, let me receive my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Joy, for those readings this morning. Shall we pray? Gracious God, may the words of my lips and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, I know this is a very intelligent, observant group that I am addressing this morning, so I know that most of you would have even known this before today, but in case you haven't noticed it, I wear glasses. The thing is, I haven't worn glasses forever. I actually got glasses when I was about 15 and a half, when I started learning to drive, and I noticed that the road signs, I couldn't read those things until they got like right here, and then whoosh, they're gone. And what does that say? You know, what was going on? So in order to pass my driver's exam at 16, I had to get glasses, or I wouldn't even be driving today. So I had grown very comfortable with my nearsightedness up to almost 16 years old. And my nearsightedness still allowed me to read things just fine, read books and whatever right here in front of me. And as I've told all of you before, I was always a school nerd. So where did I always sit in the classroom? Right in the very front. You know, so anything up in front, I could see it just fine because I was on the front row almost all the time. So it never bothered me. And the biggest thing that I noticed when I got my glasses, however, I was in the midst of playing basketball, and I wanted basketball to be my life. You know, that's what I did all the time. And I put on my glasses, and it threw my depth perception off. And I couldn't hit the side of a barn. I couldn't hit it very much anyway before then. But I decided, you know, I was not going to wear those glasses to play basketball. And of course, being believe it or not, Jared, I was sort of a timid, vain kind of a teenager myself. And, you know, I didn't want to have to wear glasses all the time. So it ended up that I had to wear glasses to drive, but I had become so comfortable with my nearsightedness that that's the only time that I wore glasses. Until I was probably maybe like 40 years old, something like that, 45, who knows. You know, that was the only time I ever wore glasses, and my nearsightedness never got any worse. And so I was very comfortable with that, and could live with that. And when I put my glasses on to drive, yeah, things were certainly clear and whatever, but, you know, I just wasn't comfortable with the way things looked in that way. We heard this story from Mark this morning about a man that is referred to as blind Bartimaeus. And as far as we know, this is the only story we have about him, as far as we know, he was completely blind. He could not see anything, at least for many years. He may have been blind since birth. We don't really know because we don't have that background on him here in the story. But I wonder, whenever I hear about someone that is like that is blind, if maybe he had become very comfortable in his blindness, just as I had become comfortable in my nearsightedness. You know, as human beings, we can adapt to most anything if we have to deal with it for a long enough period of time. And of course, all of us as sighted people, we think of blindness as being something terrible. We would not want to be blind. But a blind person that has dealt with that for most of their lives, or maybe all of their lives, they have to become comfortable with that blindness. There's some security in your life, in the routines of your life as a blind man. And I certainly assume that Bartimaeus had become comfortable in his routines and how he got to his spot there beside the road leading into Jericho, and how he got back and forth, and how he traveled, and how he ate, and the things that he did in his life day in and day out. He became very comfortable in his blindness. I wonder if that darkness had not become so familiar to him, so taken for granted, that that's who he knew himself to be. He was the blind man, the blind beggar, Bartimaeus. He was sitting by the road outside Jericho, according to this story, and I would guess he heard there was a commotion a ways away, and I would guess he grabbed the hem, perhaps, of the robe of a passerby and asked, "Hey, what's going on? I can hear something coming. You know, what's happening?" And then when he learned that there was a famous healer and a holy man called Jesus of Nazareth that was approaching, coming down the road toward him, I wonder if he struggled within himself, thinking, should I ask to be cured of my blindness? Do I really want to have my life completely changed from the comfortable way that I've been existing for these last many years? And there had to be a struggle that went on within Bartimaeus. Was he afraid that he might not receive sight if he asked for it from this healer, this great holy man? Or what would happen if he did receive sight? How would it change his life? Had he grown comfortable with his blindness, just as I was comfortable with my nearsightedness for most of my life? I think he was agonizing over that dilemma when he heard Jesus getting closer and closer. And when Jesus got close enough, we know that Bartimaeus cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And the crowds immediately tried to shush him and say, "Oh, be quiet. Be quiet. We don't want to bother this man. Be quiet." But Bartimaeus had the courage once again to shout out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And when Jesus heard this, when Jesus heard that plea for mercy, he asked that Bartimaeus be brought to him. And so some of the disciples went over and they asked Bartimaeus, "Will you come with us? Jesus would like to see you." And he got up, and it says he threw his cloak off. And he went with them over to meet Jesus. And Jesus asked that question of Bartimaeus, "What would you have me do for you?" What was going through his mind at that time? What was he thinking about? But he said, "My teacher, let me see. Let me see." And of course, the miraculous happened. Jesus did heal blind Bartimaeus, and he was immediately able to see. For better or for worse, he had chosen sight over blindness, and in the next instant he could see. He was blind no more. Jesus had healed him. And then Mark tells us something very interesting. Very interesting, very short part of this passage, but something I think is very interesting. Mark says, from that point on, Bartimaeus followed Jesus on the way. Now don't miss that part of this story. Bartimaeus followed Jesus on the way. From that point on. Well, that way was the road through Jericho and then on to Jerusalem. It was a road that would lead, if you remember, to the acclaim of the Palm Sunday crowd welcoming Jesus into Jerusalem, but it would also lead to the Last Supper that Jesus shared with his disciples. It would lead to betrayal. It would lead to great suffering. It would lead to crucifixion. It would even lead to death. That was the way that Bartimaeus was following Jesus on. And in the end, of course, that way leads to great glory as well. Now, Bartimaeus could have known none of these things when he decided to follow Jesus on the way, but he followed Jesus anyway into a life he had never dreamed of. He would have never, ever thought of as a blind beggar sitting by the side of the road. Bartimaeus used his new sight to follow Jesus on the way through discipleship. And you know, in this story, I think we tend to marvel at the grace of God given so plentifully to this poor blind beggar, Bartimaeus. But the grace was not just in the healing that took place, not just in the granting of the sight to a blind man. The grace was first in the gift of Bartimaeus longing for sight. His gift of hoping that Jesus could actually heal, that he truly was a holy man. The gift of being able to renounce the comfortable life that he had known perhaps all of his life. The life of a blind man, yes, but it was his life. And he had to be willing to give it completely up if he was going to have that sight again. Bartimaeus could have sat in silence as Jesus passed. Or he could have obeyed the crowd's orders that first time when they told him to shush and never say anything again. But he cried out again. And when they came to bring him to Jesus, Bartimaeus could have refused. He said, "No, I don't really want to do that." But he didn't. He was granted the courage to ask. He was granted the courage to ask again. And then he was granted the courage to get up and to go meet Jesus. And finally, in the face of Jesus, he was granted the courage to ask for sight, which would completely change his life. Everything that he had ever known. He would have to put his old life behind him to step out into an exhilarating, but perhaps also a very frightening new life. Life of sight. Life on the way with Jesus. What about us? Which of the characters in this little story that we hear this morning do we resemble? I believe in many ways we're sort of like the crowd. We don't want to bother anyone as important and as busy as Jesus with our little worries. So we try to shush the voices that rise up from our hearts begging for mercy from God. We say, "Nah, I don't want to worry about those." I think in other ways we're like the disciples, and maybe that's where I find myself a lot of the times. We're like the disciples. We're willing enough to run errands for the Lord, but still without a clue about who he really is and what he really can mean in our own lives. And sometimes we're very much like Bartimaeus as well. We're spiritually blind. We're groping for faith. We're groping for understanding. We want hope. We want peace. We want all the gifts of the Spirit. And yet we fear what those things would mean in our lives if we really took those on. If we really decided to follow the way of Jesus. How our lives might be transformed because we're so comfortable with where we are today and the way our lives are today. Do we really want to follow Jesus on the way? Well, my friends, may God grant us the grace to seek light so that we might be blind no more. Thanks be to God. Amen. Let us now respond to our word this morning by repeating together a modern-day affirmation of faith the second newest affirmation of faith that we have in our Presbyterian book of confessions. It's called a brief statement of faith, and you find it printed there in your bulletin this morning. So please join with me in affirming our faith together. In life and in death, we belong to God. Through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit, we trust in the one triune God, the Holy One of Israel, whom alone we worship and serve. With believers in every time and place, we rejoice that nothing in life or in death can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Amen. We now come to that point in our service where we have an opportunity to give back, where we have an opportunity to return some of the blessings that we may have received in life to help further God's kingdom here on this earth. Shall we pray, Almighty God? Use the offerings we present this day to further your kingdom. May they be blessed by the wideness of your mercy. Gracious God, in the midst of today's turbulent and often troubling times, we take refuge in you now in prayer. Allow us to take a deep breath and to always remember that you are God, are our refuge and our strength. You are our rock and our redeemer. So we ask that your Spirit flow over us now as we rest in your peace and mercy. And for this we thank you, good and gracious God. Jesus reminded us again and again that we are to care for the sick, the poor, the downtrodden, for they will always be with us, our God. We ask that you give us here in this place the will and the strength to reach out to those in need and to share your love with them this day. We ask that you be with the many that we have mentioned by name in this service this morning, and also to be with those who are unmentioned, but who we still hold in our thoughts and prayers. May your mercy surround them, and may your love embrace them now. And continue to be with us, our God, as together we repeat the prayer Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Let us rise together, either in body or in spirit, one last time, and join our voices together in our closing hymn. Open my eyes that I may see, number 563. Shall we rise together? That's the wish of all of us, that God opens our eyes and illumines us so that we also can follow on the way that Jesus has shared for us. I thank Sharon for playing that hymn twice as fast as I thought it could possibly be. And let me remind you, as we try to get out of here close to on time, that no matter what you're doing this week, and I hope you enjoy this beautiful day that we have out there today, no matter what you're doing or where you go, always remember that God is right there with you. Because God is always above us. God is always below us. God always goes behind us. God always goes before us. God always stands right beside us. And most importantly of all, at all times in our lives, God is inside us as well. Go in peace this day, my friends. Amen.